Maryland, Our Maryland. Development of the Maryland Land Market, the Colonial Maryland Land Record System. Presented by MASSE, the MidAtlantic Surveyor Institute.
Part 2.
5 years after the Pope's division of the, quote, New World between Spain and Portugal, John Cabot is credited with the discovery of continental North America in 1497, while Columbus and others were busy in the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. Sailing under a commission from King Henry VII of England, he probably landed on the island of Newfoundland. 5 years after the Pope's division of the, quote, New World between Spain and Portugal, John Cabot is credited with the discovery of continental North America in 1497, while Columbus and others were busy in the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. Sailing under a commission from King Henry VII of England, he probably landed on the island of Newfoundland. Cabot was an explorer and a navigator. Throughout his service, he demonstrated a talent for surveying and cartography, and he made detailed maps of Newfoundland. Interesting to note that while in Newfoundland, Cabot also conducted an astronomical observation, in particular of the eclipse of the sun, by obtaining an accurate estimate of the time of the start and finish of the eclipse, and comparing these with the timings of a known position in England, it was possible to calculate the longitude of the observation site in Newfoundland. Our kind of guy. Then, in the 1570s, Sir Humphrey Gilbert began to promote the establishment of an English colony on the Atlantic coast of North America. In 1578, Elizabeth granted Gilbert a charter to settle any lands in the New World that were not already ruled by a Christian prince. He landed in Newfoundland in 1583, claimed the area for Queen Elizabeth, and started a colony. Then he left the colony to explore the area around Nova Scotia. He died when his boat sank on a return cruise to England. Gilbert's half-brother, Walter Raleigh, felt it was his duty to carry out the mission of establishing a colony in the New World. He sent a small survey party to explore an area in present-day North Carolina, just north of the territory that the Spanish had claimed to have settled. On the favorable report from his surveyors, Raleigh claimed the entire region stretching along the Atlantic coast between present-day North Carolina and Maine for England. When Elizabeth died and King James I ascended the English throne, he merely based his claim to his North American territory that was on the discovery of lands not inhabited by Christians based on the explorations of Cabot, Gilbert, and Raleigh. Before we begin James's legal title to the land that comprised his colonies, let's take a couple of minutes to talk about land title. So let's go back to 800 A.D. when Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne as the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. Christians, that would mean Roman Catholics in those days, believed that the land belonged to God, and the Pope was God's representative on earth. The monarch's land became a fief of the Holy See under the lordship of a monarch. In European feudalism, a fife was not a musical instrument you played in a marching band or a drum and bugle corps. A fief was a source of income granted to a person, called a vassal, by his lord in exchange for his services. In this case, the service was protecting the church. The monarch became the defender of the church. It was a symbiotic relationship, symbolizing both the Pope's right to crown Christian sovereigns and also the monarch's role as the protector of the Pope and his church, and also the monarch's role as protector of the Pope and his church. Is a historically legitimate right of ownership to land after immediate possession via force of arms. Proponents state that this right acknowledges the status quo, and that denial of the right is meaningless unless one is able and willing to use military force to deny it. Under the doctrine of discovery, title to lands lay with the government whose subjects traveled to and occupied a territory whose inhabitants were not subject of a European Christian monarch. In 1494, the Treaty of Tordesillas declared that only non-Christian lands could be under the doctrine of discovery. You might also be interested in digging into these issues by taking MASSE's short courses, Conveyance of Real Property, and adverse possession and prescription, both of which were conducted by Attorney Jack Gahn and surveyor Joe Leininger on several community college campuses across the state a number of years ago, but are still popular with Maryland surveyors today as distance learning continual professional competency programs on CDs from Massey. Let's get back to our story of King James and his land acquisition, title, and property rights. So while King James I of England is probably best remembered today for the authorized King James Version of the Bible, it was under his reign that the plantation of Ulster began. Land in the 6 counties of, quote, Northern Ireland were seized and settled by English and Scots Protestants, and the English colonization of North America started its course. So let's remember, England at that time was still under the feudal system, and let's talk about land title and conveyance in a feudal monarchy. The monarch had the title to all the land and could acquire income, quit-rents, by granting land rights. More land could produce more income, which James first sorely needed. His solution was colonization. Wait a minute, how did James acquire title to so much land? Good question. The short answer is by conquest, inheritance, by discovery, by adverse possession, through abandonment. An English king had married the sister of the Duke of Normandy across the Channel. Their son became Edward the Confessor, who succeeded to the English throne. He became King of England and gained title to all the land of England. He died childless, so William claimed the title of King of England and title to the real property as a fief, the vassal of the Pope. William confiscated the estates of the English lords and redistributed parts of their lands. William and his barons also exercised tighter control over inheritance of property by widows and daughters, often forcing marriages to Normans. You might call it conveyance by inheritance, or you might call it transfer of interest, such as by adverse possession or abandonment. I don't know that the issue was ever litigated. But back to our topic, William claimed ultimate possession of all the land of England, over which he now had de facto control. All land henceforth was, quote, held directly from the king in feudal tenure in return for military service. Pope Adrian IV sanctioned the second military intervention in 1169. England was a fief of the Holy See until King Henry VIII separated England from the Catholic Church. The English Parliament declared the King of England to be the defender of the faith, so the English monarch was no longer a vassal of the Pope in Rome. He was the vassal of God in heaven, which made him Lord and gave him title to all the lands. So King James now had what he considered to be clear title to England, Scotland, and Ireland. He started his colonization with Ulster. Land was confiscated from rebellious dukes and turned over to English and Scottish investors. The venture was subsidized by the 12 great guilds of London. The native Irish population was to be cleared off the estates and replaced by Scottish and English settlers, and King James I collected his tolls. The English East India Company had been incorporated by royal charter on December 31st, 1600, to share in the East India spice trade. George Calvert, later to become the first Lord Baltimore, was among the early investors. Scattered Spanish settlements in the south and one French colony in the north were the only representatives of European civilization in North America when James became King of England. The next few years witnessed a mighty change. England embarked on a course of settlement and conquest. Just 3 years after he became King of England, he set up 2 investor-owned companies to develop the English portion of North America, both chartered in 1606. He gave the Plymouth Company rights to plant settlements from 45 degrees north latitude, roughly the Canadian border, to 38 degrees north, which is now northern Virginia and all of Maryland's eastern shore. And he gave the London Company rights from 34 degrees north, roughly the southern point of North Carolina, to 41 degrees north, the New York-New Jersey border at the mouth of the Hudson River. George needed income, remember? The country was broke, he was a cagey guy, and he liked competition, and he thirsted for colonial expansion. So the rights were not exclusive. What are now Maryland, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and New Jersey were all up for grabs. James stipulated that neither of his chartered companies could found a settlement within 100 miles of the others. Meanwhile, Europe had developed a craving for codfish and discovered an abundant supply of cod off the coast of Newfoundland. After British merchants began expressing an interest in the Newfoundland fishery, James gave a charter to the London and Bristol Company. That charter, granted by James on May 2nd, 1610, gave the company a monopoly in agriculture, mining, fishing, and hunting on the Avalon Peninsula in southeastern Newfoundland. George Calvert, the first Lord Baltimore, wasn't to the manor born, as the expression goes. Although he died as a member of the nobility, an English knight and an Irish baron, he left an estate valued at about $40 million in 2020 dollars. He was born in 1579 or 1580 and raised in an upper middle class family in the northern Midland region of England during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. His father was a country gentleman who raised cattle on an estate in Yorkshire, an area in northern England. His mother was a, quote, gentlewoman of a noble line. The Winthrops, the Penns, the Washingtons, the Calverts all had their old English homes in Yorkshire. Educated at Oxford, George Calvert studied foreign languages and received a bachelor's degree. After Oxford, he moved in 1598 to London, where he studied municipal law at Lincoln's Inn for 3 years. He took the grand tour of Europe, as was customary for people of his class and times. The precocious young Mr. Calvert became politically active during that tour. That's when he met Sir Richard Cecil, spymaster to Queen Elizabeth. George carried a packet for Cecil from Paris to London, so he entered the service of the man who would soon be made a Privy Councillor and Secretary of State by King James. George Calvert achieved domestic political success as a Member of Parliament and later as Secretary of State under King James. His social status received a further boost when he was knighted, then becoming Sir George Calvert. Business interests. George began investing in real estate in England and Ireland in 1616 after King James endowed him with a manor in Derby Whiskey in Yorkshire. Calvert was now wealthy enough to buy the Kipling Hall estate in his home parish. Today, the University of Maryland operates a research center there. His personal fortune was secured a few years later when he was appointed a, quote, Commissioner of the Treasury with a pension of 1,000 British pounds sterling, more than $3 million in 2020 US dollars. And a subsidiary on imported silk, which would later be converted to another 1,000-pound pension. That pension enabled him to buy land on the Avalon Peninsula in Newfoundland from a man who had failed to establish a colony on that island. 2 years later, the king gave George Calvert a grant for the entire country of Newfoundland. King James rewarded Calvert in 1623 for his loyalty by appointing him Baron Baltimore and making him a lord in the Irish aristocracy and granting him a 2,300-acre estate in Ireland, where his seat became known as the Manor of Baltimore, M-A-N-O-R, the Manor of Baltimore. Baltimore was one of 6 baronies created on the confiscated land in County Langford by James I and planted by English and Scottish landowners. Over the years, Calvert had accumulated considerable wealth. Maryland, Our Maryland. Development of the Maryland land market, the colonial Maryland land record system. Presented by MASSE, the MidAtlantic Surveyor Institute.